There is a moment when a woman realizes something quietly, almost with surprise. She notices how often her mouth opens not to speak her truth, but to defend it. How many words she uses just to be allowed to exist. How much energy she spends explaining herself to people who were never really listening. This moment doesn't come with anger. It comes with exhaustion. Because at some point in a woman's life, explaining herself stops feeling polite and starts feeling like self-erasure. Maybe you recognize this. You explain why you said no. You explain why you need rest. You explain why you changed your mind. You explain your silence. You explain your boundaries. You explain your emotions as if they were crimes that require justification. And the most painful part is this: you don't do it because someone explicitly asked. You do it because somewhere along the way, you learned that your presence must be earned. In Japanese culture, there is a word that helps us understand this pattern deeply. It is called enryo. Enryo is often translated as restraint or holding back. It is the quiet habit of not imposing, not disturbing, not taking up too much space. At its healthiest, enryo is about respect. But when carried too far, especially by women, it becomes a cage. Many women have lived their entire lives practicing enryo without ever knowing its name. They learn to soften their voice, to over-explain their choices, to apologize before they even speak, to make themselves smaller so others feel comfortable. And over time, something subtle happens. A woman forgets that she is allowed to exist without a footnote. For women in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, this realization often arrives like a quiet rebellion. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just firm. A woman begins to feel that she no longer wants to negotiate her worth. She has lived. She has loved. She has lost. She has endured things that never required an explanation, only courage. And yet, here she is, still explaining why she needs space. Why she feels tired. Why she doesn't want what she once wanted. Why she no longer fits inside roles that once defined her. In Japan, wisdom often comes from what is not said. From what is left untouched. From the space between words. This space is called ma. Ma is the pause. The silence that carries meaning. The dignity of not filling every gap with noise or justification. A woman who understands ma no longer rushes to explain herself. She allows silence to stand where explanations once lived. She understands that not every truth needs defending. Because here is the truth many women were never taught: you do not owe clarity to those who refuse to see you clearly. A woman who has reached maturity carries something powerful inside her. Not ambition to please. Not hunger for approval. But a deep, embodied knowing. She knows when something feels wrong. She knows when something no longer belongs. She knows when a season has ended. And still, she explains. Why? Because from a young age, women were trained to believe that being understood is safer than being sovereign. But Japanese philosophy offers a different path, one that does not require force, confrontation, or emotional labor. It offers shibumi. Shibumi is quiet elegance. Effortless authority. Strength without display. A woman who embodies shibumi does not persuade. She does not convince. She does not over-articulate her soul. She speaks when it matters. And when she does not speak, her presence still answers. There is a story of a woman in her late 50s who spent decades explaining herself to everyone, her family, her colleagues, even strangers. She explained why she needed time alone. Why she didn't want to attend certain gatherings. Why she had changed. One day, she stopped mid-sentence. Someone questioned her choice, expecting the familiar justification. And she simply said, calmly, "This is what works for me." No apology. No elaboration. No defense. The silence that followed felt uncomfortable, not for her, but for the person who expected access to her reasoning. That silence was Ma. That calm was Shibumi. That boundary was freedom. And something shifted inside her forever. Many women believe that stopping explanations will make them seem cold or unkind. But the opposite is true. Over-explaining is not kindness. It is fear dressed as politeness. And fear is heavy. At this point, let me gently ask you something, and if you feel called, share it. In what situations do you notice yourself explaining more than necessary? Your boundaries? Your emotions? Your choices? Leave a comment. Naming it is often the first step toward releasing it. As women age, something beautiful happens beneath the surface. The need to perform slowly dissolves. The desire for truth grows stronger. This is not bitterness. This is clarity. Japanese wisdom never asks a woman to become louder to be powerful. It asks her to become more precise, more grounded, more intentional. A woman does not need to explain herself when her life already speaks. And in the next part of this journey, we will go deeper into how a woman gently releases the habit of explanation, not by hardening her heart, but by strengthening her center. Because the most radical thing a woman can do at this stage of life is to stop asking for permission to be who she already is. There comes a stage in a woman's life when she begins to sense that her constant explanations are not acts of communication, but acts of protection learned long ago, repeated so often that they became invisible. She notices that before anyone questions her, she is already preparing answers, softening edges, offering context, and translating her inner world into something more acceptable, more digestible, more convenient for others. This habit did not appear overnight, and it did not come from weakness, it came from adaptation. Many women learned early that harmony was rewarded, that being agreeable kept the peace, and that explaining themselves reduced conflict, even if it increased inner tension. Over time, this survival skill hardened into identity, and the woman who once explained to stay safe now explains automatically, even when safety is no longer at risk. What she does not always realize is that this habit slowly drains her authority, because every unnecessary explanation subtly places her below the judgment of others. Japanese wisdom observes human behavior with precision rather than judgment, and it recognizes that what weakens a woman is not her softness, but her disconnection from her center. In this tradition, strength does not come from confrontation or excess expression, but from alignment, from knowing when words add value and when silence carries more truth. This is where the concept of Ma becomes not just philosophical, but deeply practical for a woman who is ready to stop justifying her existence. Ma is the space that allows meaning to breathe, and when a woman begins to trust this space, she no longer rushes to fill it with explanations. She understands that silence does not mean inadequacy, and that pauses do not signal confusion, but confidence. When she speaks less reactively, she starts to feel something unfamiliar but deeply stabilizing, which is the sensation of standing firmly inside herself without leaning outward for approval. At this stage of maturity, a woman has already proven herself through decades of responsibility, care, resilience, and emotional labor, and yet she may still feel compelled to justify choices that come from wisdom rather than impulse. She explains why she no longer wants certain relationships, why her energy has changed, why her priorities look different now. What she is truly doing in these moments is negotiating her right to evolve, as if growth itself requires permission. Japanese philosophy offers a quiet correction to this belief by reminding women that dignity is not something granted by others, but something maintained internally. Shibumi teaches that when a woman embodies simplicity and self-trust, she does not need to convince, persuade, or elaborate excessively, because her grounded presence communicates more than words ever could. This is not detachment, and it is not coldness. It is emotional economy, a refusal to spend energy where it no longer yields nourishment. There is often fear beneath the habit of explanation, and it usually sounds like this: if I don't explain, I will be misunderstood, rejected, or seen as selfish. However, maturity reveals a deeper truth, which is that being constantly understood is not the same as being respected, and that clarity does not always create connection. In fact, over-explaining often invites more questions, more doubts, and more intrusion, because it teaches others that your inner world is open for debate. When a woman begins to stop explaining, she does not become harsh, she becomes clear. She starts answering questions without defending her answers, expressing needs without apologizing for them, and setting boundaries without providing emotional footnotes. This shift may feel uncomfortable at first, especially for women who were praised for being accommodating, but discomfort here is not a sign of wrongdoing, it is a sign of recalibration. This is the moment when a woman moves from enryo as self-erasure into enryo as conscious restraint, choosing not to reveal everything, not because she is afraid, but because she understands that privacy is power. She realizes that her life does not require constant narration, and that she is allowed to keep parts of herself unspoken, unshared, and unexamined by others. At this point in the journey, it is worth reflecting gently on how often you explain yourself not because clarity is needed, but because anxiety appears when silence stretches even a little. If you notice this pattern, you are not failing, you are waking up. And if this reflection resonates with you, and you have not yet done so, feel welcome to subscribe to the channel, because this space exists for women who are ready to grow without abandoning themselves in the process. As women move deeper into their 40s, 50s, and 60s, something inside them begins to resist unnecessary effort, not out of laziness, but out of wisdom. They become less interested in proving their value and more interested in protecting their peace. This internal shift is not loud, and it rarely announces itself, but it changes everything, because the woman who stops explaining starts listening inwardly instead of outwardly. She notices how much lighter her body feels when she does not rehearse conversations that may never happen, how her breath deepens when she allows others to sit with their discomfort, and how her intuition sharpens when she no longer interrupts it with excessive reasoning. She understands that not every reaction requires a response, and not every misunderstanding requires correction. Japanese teachings emphasize that harmony is not created by self-sacrifice alone, but by balance, and balance requires a woman to know when to give and when to withhold. A woman who withholds explanations is not withholding love, she is withholding depletion. She is choosing to remain whole rather than constantly available, and this choice gradually restores her sense of sovereignty. There is a profound difference between being open and being exposed, and maturity teaches a woman to recognize where that line lives within her. She can be kind without being porous, generous without being depleted, and present without being performative. This distinction becomes clearer when she trusts that her worth does not increase with the number of words she offers in her defense. The habit of explaining dissolves not because a woman forces herself to stop, but because she no longer needs it. She no longer fears being misunderstood, because she understands that misunderstanding does not diminish her truth. She no longer tries to manage other people's perceptions, because she finally recognizes that doing so was never within her control. And as this realization settles, something quiet but powerful begins to emerge, which is a new relationship with her own authority. She starts to feel comfortable letting her decisions stand on their own, allowing her presence to speak without commentary, and trusting that those who are meant to understand her will do so without requiring exhaustive explanations. In the next part of this journey, we will explore how this inner authority becomes embodied in daily life, shaping the way a woman moves, speaks, chooses, and rests, and how the simple act of no longer explaining becomes a profound declaration of self-respect. At some point, a woman realizes that stopping her explanations is not an act of rebellion against others, but an act of loyalty to herself, because every unnecessary justification she releases creates space for something far more valuable to enter her life: inner authority. This authority does not demand attention, does not raise its voice, and does not seek validation, yet it reshapes everything, from the way she walks into a room to the way she leaves conversations that no longer feel aligned. This is where the transformation becomes embodied, because a woman who no longer explains herself begins to live differently, not intentionally at first, but naturally, as if her body finally understands that it is safe to rest inside its own decisions. She speaks with fewer words, but greater weight, listens without the urge to correct, and allows others to carry their reactions without rushing to soften them. This does not make her distant, it makes her anchored. Japanese wisdom teaches that true strength is quiet and rooted, like a mountain that does not explain why it stands where it stands. A woman who internalizes this truth stops performing emotional labor for situations that do not deserve her energy, and she recognizes that not every question is an invitation, not every opinion requires engagement, and not every discomfort needs resolution. This discernment is not learned through force, it emerges through self-trust. For many women, especially those who have spent decades caring for others, explaining became a way to maintain connection, to prevent conflict, and to ensure harmony, but maturity reveals a deeper form of harmony, one that does not require self-abandonment. This harmony arises when a woman honors her internal rhythm, respects her limits, and understands that peace does not come from being understood by everyone, but from being aligned with herself. When a woman stops explaining, she also stops shrinking, because explanations often function as invisible apologies for taking up space. Without them, her presence expands naturally, not in volume, but in clarity. She begins to feel less reactive, less defensive, and more at ease with letting life unfold without constant narration. This ease is not passive, it is deeply grounded, born from the understanding that her life no longer requires external permission. There is a subtle but profound shift that occurs when a woman allows her decisions to exist without commentary, because she starts trusting her own timing, her own intuition, and her own pace. She no longer rushes to prove that her choices make sense, and she stops editing herself to fit into expectations that were never designed with her evolution in mind. This freedom is quiet, but it is unmistakable. Japanese philosophy often emphasizes that when something is truly aligned, it does not need embellishment, and this applies to a woman's life as much as it applies to art, movement, or nature. When she lives from this place, her boundaries become simple statements rather than emotional negotiations, and her silence becomes a form of communication rather than an absence. She understands that saying less does not mean caring less, it means caring more selectively. This is especially powerful for women in midlife and beyond, because at this stage, life has already revealed its impermanence, its unpredictability, and its demands, and there is no longer a desire to waste energy on what does not nourish the soul. A woman begins to value depth over explanation, presence over performance, and truth over comfort, both for herself and for others. The habit of over-explaining fades when a woman fully accepts that being misunderstood is not a failure, and that clarity does not always create connection. Some people will understand her less as she grows, not because she is unclear, but because she has outgrown the version of herself they were comfortable with. This realization can feel unsettling, but it is also liberating, because it marks the moment she stops negotiating her evolution. As this journey settles, a woman begins to experience a new kind of peace, one that comes from no longer anticipating judgment, no longer rehearsing defenses, and no longer managing perceptions. Her nervous system softens, her thoughts slow, and her inner voice becomes steadier, because it is no longer competing with the noise of constant self-justification. This peace is earned, not given, and it arrives quietly, without ceremony. If this shift speaks to you, if you feel something loosening inside as you imagine a life with fewer explanations and more inner permission, know that you are not alone in this transition. Many women are reaching this threshold, where silence feels safer than overexposure, and authenticity feels more important than approval. This is not withdrawal, it is return. Return to yourself. Return to your center. Return to the woman who no longer needs to explain why she deserves respect, rest, or space. And if this journey resonated with you, if you felt seen, understood, or quietly empowered, subscribe to the channel and join this circle of feminine wisdom, where growth does not require force, and liberation begins with self-trust. You have already lived enough to know who you are. Now you are simply choosing to honor her.